The sun stretched across the plains like a bleeding wound, casting long, copper shadows over the cracked earth of the frontier. Wind moaned low through the canyon passes, slipping between jagged rocks and broken bones of forgotten cattle. The town of Willow Creek, if one could call it a town, sat in the hollow of the desert, like a secret best left buried. Dust clung to the skin, and silence settled thick on the shoulders of those who stayed. Folks didn't talk much, and when they did, it was usually about the thing they'd seen, out by the far ranches, slipping among the livestock at dusk. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a bear. It was something else. They called it a ghost. Some said it was the spirit of a slaughtered child. Others swore it was just a wild dog that walked like a human. One man, half drunk and shaking, claimed to have seen yellow eyes blinking from beneath a cow's belly as it fed. Whatever it was, the ranchers were scared. Livestock was vanishing, and the preacher, a trembling man who hadn't raised his voice in years, stood outside the saloon one morning and begged anyone to do something. Jedediah Kane sat in the corner of that saloon, half-shadowed, half-forgotten. He hadn't spoken to a soul in weeks, hadn't looked anyone in the eye in longer than that. The townsfolk called him the grave ghost behind his back, not just because of his silence, but because of how close death always seemed to hang around him. He wore the war on his body, deep furrows in his face, a limp in his left leg, 2 fingers missing from his right hand, a gray coat he never removed, even in the blistering heat. Jed had been a tracker once, a killer when it was needed. Long before the world got quiet, he looked up at the preacher without a word, then stood. No one asked where he was going. No one stopped him. He took to the high ridges first, scanning the land with eyes that had once spotted enemies through smoke and cannon fire. The tracks were faint, barely visible, a soft pattern in the dust, clawed but not animal. At night, the sound of distant bleating echoed off the canyon walls, interrupted by something else. Breathing, shuffling, watching. For 3 days, Jed followed the trail into the belly of the land, deep into the red rock basins, where even the snakes kept their heads low. And then he found a place. An old ranch, broken by time and fire. The fences had collapsed, but a few goats still wandered the grounds, skin stretched over bone. Something had been feeding them just enough. Jed moved slow. Every step was deliberate, his breath shallow. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, in the far corner, curled up beneath a haystack, was a girl. She looked no older than 15. Hair tangled in knots, skin blotched with grime, her dress torn and matted. Her feet were bare, her fingers curled like claws. She didn't move when he stepped in. She watched, animal eyes, wide and unblinking. When he took a step closer, she hissed, sharp and guttural. Then she lunged, not at him, but toward the back of the barn. She scrambled like a creature on all fours, knocking over a rusted pail, slipping between broken beams. He didn't chase. He waited. Then he placed a canteen of water and half a biscuit on the hay, turned, and left. The next morning, the biscuit was gone. He returned the next day, brought more food. A blanket rough but clean. She was there again, perched in the shadows, watching with suspicion. He spoke then, low and steady. "Name's Jed," he said. "Not here to hurt you." She bared her teeth. He didn't flinch. "You got a name." Silence. "I'm gonna call you Clara. That all right?" The silence stayed, but something in her eyes flickered. Recognition, maybe, or confusion. Over the days, the ritual continued. Jed brought food, water, sometimes a book he read aloud from while she crouched silently, chewing slowly, eyes never leaving him. She didn't speak, but she stopped hissing. She began to wait for him. The sun rose higher each day, painting the rocks in gold and fire. On the 6th day, Jed found her curled near the door. When he entered, she didn't run. She let him sit. For a long time, neither of them said a word. Later, she reached toward him, not for his hand, but for the locket around his neck. Her fingers brushed it. Then she pulled back and stared at the ground. That night, Jed walked the perimeter of the ranch. There were things he'd noticed. Scorch marks on the old siding, bullet holes, a child's drawing, half-burned, pinned beneath a floorboard. The next morning, he climbed the ridge behind the property. There, half covered in dust and silence, stood what had once been a family homestead. Blackened beams, collapsed roof, and on the doorframe, deep scratches, like claw marks. Not animal. Not human either. Something desperate. Something left behind. Inside he found bones. Not many, just enough. A mother's shawl. A man's belt buckle with the initials HG. And near the fireplace, a locket. Silver. Bent. He pried it open. Inside, a tiny portrait of a girl. Curly hair. Big eyes. Maybe 6 or 7 in the painting. Her name etched on the back, Clarabelle Grant. He brought the locket back to the barn the next evening. Sat across from her in the straw and placed it between them. Was this yours? Clara looked at it, then at him, and for the first time, she nodded. Jed leaned back. A bitter wind blew through the broken boards, carrying the sound of a distant howl. Back in Willow Creek, the name Blacktooth Riders was still whispered in locked rooms. 2 winters ago, they'd passed through, left a dozen families dead, 3 ranches in flames. The Grant homestead was among them. No survivors, they said. No bodies found whole. Just ashes and blood. No one had thought to look for the girl. She had stayed alive. Hidden. Crawling beneath the floorboards when the screams started. Burrowing into the hay with the goats. For 2 years, she had survived among beasts. And now, Jed understood why she hadn't spoken. The world she had known had ended in fire and horror. But he also saw the flicker in her eyes. A light, dim but steady. He didn't tell anyone in town. They wouldn't understand. Not yet. So he returned every day. Spoke to her. Listened to the wind. And watched slowly, as the girl who had once been mistaken for a beast began to remember what it meant to be human. The wind came first, dry, bitter, thick with the scent of smoke and something fouler. By the time the sun had lowered behind the far canyon ridge, word had already reached Willow Creek. The Blacktooth Riders were back. A trading post 30 miles out had been found in cinders, the storekeeper nailed to his own floorboards. A rancher's boy arrived half dead on a limping horse, talking nonsense about flames, black scarves, and horses foaming at the mouth. The saloon buzzed low with panic. Men spoke in hushed voices, gripping their glasses tighter than usual, their eyes darting to the doors, the windows, the distance. Mothers kept their children close. Ranch hands started packing wagons. And then, for the first time in weeks, Jedediah Kane walked in. He looked like part of the wind itself, long coat flapping, a layer of dust on his shoulders, eyes darker than the devil's own horse. No one said a word as he crossed the room, only watched the man they once thought too far gone to matter. He stopped in front of the sheriff, a man who looked like he'd never tasted fear until just then. Evacuate, Jed said simply. Send the women and children north. Take every rider with half a brain and get them out by dawn. You staying? The sheriff asked, voice hollow. I'm not running, Jed said, then turned and left. He didn't notice the figure that slipped after him, silent as mist, barefoot and thin, eyes glowing with something feral. Clara followed him without question, drawn by instinct, something deeper than memory or reason. She stayed in the shadows, watched him as he walked the path toward war, a man who'd already died once and was ready to die again. Jed's cabin sat on the edge of the ridge, half swallowed by rock and brush. Inside, time stood still. A trunk beneath the floorboards gave up its contents slowly. An old Union coat with faded trim, a long rifle with a silver inlay, a knife with notches carved deep along the handle. He laid them out with the care of a priest handling relics. Memories returned like ghosts. The field at Gettysburg. Smoke thicker than breath. Men screaming, dying, and him, moving between them like a phantom. The name they gave him, Hellhound. Not because he killed without pause, but because he never stopped moving, never hesitated. Now he worked in silence, rigging traps along the town's outer edges, tripwires, broken glass, sharpened nails beneath sand. He poured oil into lanterns and placed them near choke points. He sighted the rifle, cleaned it, loaded it, and checked it again. Behind him, Clara watched. She said nothing, but her eyes followed every motion. She mimicked his steps, his gestures. When he set a trap, she memorized it. When he tested a tripwire, she nodded faintly to herself. Her hands were still small, but they were steady. That night, The stars were smothered by clouds. The wind died, and with it came an awful stillness. Then came the thunder of hooves. The ground trembled. From the ridgeline they came, dozens of them, riders in dark coats, bandanas pulled over their faces, guns gleaming like wolves' teeth in the moonlight. They rode hard and fast, whooping and hollering, their laughter a song of coming death. The first trap exploded in fire and splinters, sending 2 horses crashing to the dirt. Screams followed. The next rider was caught by wire, slung from the saddle like a broken doll. Jed moved from rooftop to alley, the long rifle barking like judgment itself. His aim was merciless. 1 shot, 1 kill. He moved like he had in the war, never still, never seen. A shadow among shadows. But the years had weight. His breath came faster. His knee buckled once. He paused behind a water trough to reload, and a bullet caught him clean in the side. He fell back, stunned, breath knocked from his chest. Blood bloomed through his coat. The riders advanced. They set fire to the general store. Windows shattered. Screams filled the air. 1 man tried to run and was cut down in the dust. Clara saw him fall. From behind the stables, she emerged, barefoot and silent. Her hair whipped around her face. Her breath came fast, not in fear, but in rage. She didn't know the names of the men attacking. She didn't know why they burned or why they killed. But she knew the scent of fire. She knew the sound of gunshots. And she knew what it was to be hunted, cornered, and forgotten. She screamed, a sound that did not belong to any girl. It was raw, cracked, deep from the belly. A war cry born of loss. She ran straight into the chaos, dodging flames, slipping through smoke. One of the riders caught sight of her and laughed, raising his pistol lazily. Before he could fire, she slammed a branding iron through his throat. Another turned, shouting, gun already drawn. She dove low, grabbed the knife Jed had dropped, and drove it up beneath his ribs. Blood sprayed across her face. She didn't blink. She kept moving. From the church steps, the remaining townsfolk watched in disbelief. This was no beast. Not the creature they once whispered about. This was a girl barefoot, burning, alive with fury and purpose. She pulled Jed from where he lay slumped behind the trough. He groaned, weak but alive. She pressed her hands to his side, eyes wide with something not quite panic. He smiled through blood. "You're still here," he rasped. She nodded, trembling. From the rooftop, the last rider aimed down at her. A single shot cracked through the chaos. But it wasn't his. Jed's rifle spoke one final time. The rider dropped, arms flailing, body thudding against the dirt. And then silence. Fire licked at the last corners of the town. The stench of blood and smoke hung low. Clara sat beside Jed, arms around her knees, chest heaving. Her hands were stained. Her dress was torn, but in her eyes burned something that had not been there before, a knowing, a name, a place in the world. Around her, the town began to rise. Slowly, cautiously, and for the first time, they looked at her without fear. Not an animal, not a ghost, a girl, transformed. Morning rose slow over Willow Creek, pulling a thin veil of gold across the broken town. Smoke still curled from smoldering rooftops. Blood mingled with the dust. The wind carried silence, now thick, reverent, stunned. Among the wreckage, Jed lay half-propped against the old trough, one arm limp, the other pressed hard to his bleeding side. His eyes fluttered open to the sight of Clara kneeling beside him, her hands trembling, her face streaked with soot and blood. Her lips moved, but no words came. He studied her, eyes wild no longer, but full of something raw and human. Grief, fury, love. Her hair clung to her cheek in damp tangles. She reached for him, and when her fingers touched his, her shoulders began to shake. He gave a soft, crooked smile. "You're not a beast," he whispered, voice nearly lost to the breeze. "You're a girl." And just like that, Clara wept. It was not a beast's cry, not a scream. It was quiet, fragile, a sound that had waited years to be free. Weeks passed like the turning of slow, tender pages. The townsfolk buried their dead. They scrubbed blood from windows, rebuilt fences. Life, as it always did, pressed onward, brutal but determined. Jed survived. He'd taken a bullet through the side, and though he never stood quite straight again, he walked with the help of a carved cane Clara made herself. She changed too. Bit by bit, she bathed in the river, let the preacher's wife trim her hair. She began wearing old dresses left behind by a dead girl no one could quite name. Still barefoot, always barefoot, but her steps now traced purpose instead of fear. She spoke. Not much, never more than a few words at a time, but when she did, it was with careful weight. Thank you. I will. I remember. In the mornings, she helped the smithy hammer nails. In the afternoons, she fed the goats, even the sick ones. At night she drew lines of charcoal across yellowed paper, images of fire and horses, of goats curled in hay, of a man with a crooked smile and a rifle across his knees. The town stopped calling her the wild girl. They said Clara now, or just nodded when she passed. A few even waved. One evening, Jed called her to the edge of the ridge, where the land opened like a great old book. He held something small in his palm, bent silver, a thin chain. The locket. He pressed it into her hand. She opened it. Inside, a tiny portrait of a smiling child, younger than she could remember being. Hair brushed neat. A dress that looked too soft to have ever been real. She blinked down at it. The shape of her own face stared back at her, untouched by time or pain. He handed her a brittle newspaper, yellowed at the edges. Family killed in outlaw raid. Only daughter presumed dead. She stared at the print, then at the locket, then at the ruins of the ranch that once held her world. I remember the horse, she said, voice distant. The fire, they pulled me. Her breath hitched. She didn't finish. But she didn't need to. Jed placed a hand on her shoulder. Clarabelle Grant, he said, voice thick. That was your name. She looked out across the canyon. Let the wind move through her hair. Not anymore. They never spoke of it again. But from that day forward, she signed her drawings Clara. Time passed, as it must. The town healed. Crops returned. New settlers arrived. Stories began to spread, whispers at first, growing with each telling. They spoke of the girl who had once lived among animals, who rose from the hay to fight monsters with fire in her eyes. Some called her the ghost of Willow Creek. Others, the girl with the beast's heart. Children left small tokens by the barn where she had once hidden. A ribbon, a stone carved with her initials, a clover pressed into wax paper. And one morning, just before sunrise, Jed was gone. No goodbye, no note, until Clara found it, folded under her pillow, written in his careful, weathered hand. Asterisk, you were never broken. Just wild. Stay wild, Clara, asterisk. She held it to her chest, standing alone beneath the rising light. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. He had taught her what silence could mean. Years passed, and the girl grew. 17 now, tall and lithe, her hair darker than night, her hands always stained with ink or earth. She stood often at the edge of the canyon with Jed's rifle across her shoulder, boots resting nearby, her feet planted firm in the dust she once called home. She watched the horizon with eyes that had seen too much, and still, they held wonder. She had no need for legends. She was one,